life comes experience. With experience comes knowledge. And with knowledge comes inspiration. This is the AOA Ali Show. Welcome to the AOA Show. Today we have an incredible young woman all the way from Australia, and we'd like to welcome her to the show. Or should I say welcome to the USA? Welcome to the show, Toltal.
Thank you, Aisha. Welcome to you too. You're from Australia as well.
Yes, you can tell by the accent.
Yeah. Welcome to the Australian program.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Toltal, what is your field of study?
Well, my current field of study is psychology. So I'm currently doing my PhD at the moment. But where I initially started from was, I guess, in my undergrad years. So I did my bachelor's in psychology and sociology, and I did my honours level studies, specialisation in psychology, and my thesis was in forensics, and my master's in education, because I'm passionate about education, and I'm currently enrolled in my PhD, as I mentioned earlier, which is looking at the psychology of language, and I'm particularly interested at looking at the Oromo language.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So you're also the director of Afan Publications. Could you tell us a bit more about Afan Publications?
Well, it depends on what you want to know, but I guess in saying the director of Afan Publications, I think that's exactly what I do. I direct the direction or the vision that Afan has for the wider community. Afan is really an extension of my community work. So most of my work for many years has been volunteering, helping out with the community. And what happened was, Aisha, and I guess you can relate to this too, because you've volunteered and you're quite actively involved in, having your own TV program and working in the community. I find that the more you volunteer, the more you get to know people, the more you network, you start to develop skills and you meet people with skills. And eventually, I guess, Afan was something that was waiting to happen. It was skills of all of these people, bringing them together for a major gap that I found in a lot of my community work, which was culturally friendly products for children in the Oromo language.
Oh, it's a great thing that you're doing. I'm personally really proud of you. And
How come?
I wonder. No, that's fantastic. I also know that you've worked in various different organizations.
Yes.
And what are these various organizations that you have worked in?
Oh, well, pre-Afan, before Afan Publications?
Oh, before Afan.
Okay, so my voluntary work started since I was a child. So I think I'd like to say my voluntary work with different organisations started from home. So my parents were very heavily involved in their respective communities, the Oromo community, the Muslim community, the Turkish community, and I'd always watch my parents get involved. And so whether they were hosting barbecues or whether they were, my dad was running a weekend school, I was always hanging around by the sidelines. So I watched a lot of how it was done. And eventually, as I grew older, I became more involved. And what happened was I became more involved in multiple organizations, but it was, I think for me, it was the American attacks in New York, the September 11 bombings, was quite significant for me because I'm a visibly Muslim woman. You can see that I'm a Muslim. And for the first time in my life, I was being attacked for the way I looked. So that was really confronting. And what I wanted to do was to do something about it, but I didn't know what to do. So I was involved with a religious group or Muslim group at the time, and they were very heavily involved in advocacy. So I did a lot of voluntary work with them. They did a lot of engagement with communities, cross-cultural training, professional development, get-togethers and meets and greets. I would get involved quite heavily with them. And by doing that, what I actually picked up more than the religion was all of these organisational skills that I never would have otherwise had. So I learnt about events management, project management, conflict handling, prioritisation, conflict resolution, objection handling. All of these things I picked up through my voluntary work. And because I wasn't getting paid to do it, I was essentially having to do my role without a paycheck at the end of the day. So all of a sudden I was there because I wanted to. And by picking up all those skills and learning from the best of the best, so there were many people in the best of their fields volunteering just like me. And I guess they took me under their wings. So through that, I branched into TV, media, radio. I was involved in my own television program, so co-hosting a show for 4 years. That went nationally on television.
I used to watch that show, Slam Cafe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the good old days. So I was involved in that television program, so I learned a lot about media. I volunteered for the Oromo radio at times to read their news broadcasts, so I learned about radio from there. I was involved in a lot of cross-cultural work with the Islamic Council of Victoria, so I was exposed to very high-level organisations who for me in the role of a cross-cultural trainer, and I learned so many skills by interacting and engaging with them. So I had all these skill sets, and eventually the Oromo community contacted me saying, well, you're already involved with so much stuff in the community, you teach in the weekend schools, why don't you come and work for our community? So I feel like by volunteering I had all of these skill sets that I was able to bring into the Oromo community, and I was lucky that they embraced it so well. So all up, I'd say I've probably done about maybe 400 presentations to schools and organisations within Australia, across Australia, and that's not including all of the community work that I've been involved in over the years.
Well, I could basically say you're like a superwoman.
I don't know about a superwoman with a lot of time on her
God.
hands, so it's been quite a lot of years, and it builds up over a period of time.
Accumulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, like, all these organizations that you've been involved with are all quite different, you know, faith
Yes.
background, cultural background,
Yes.
community organizations. What do you think is the commonality or the similarity between these organizations that you've worked with or for?
That's a really good question, because most people say it's so diverse. How do you manage it? I think for me, what unites all of those factors together is that every single one of them relate to my identity. They relate to how I see myself as a person. So I see myself, you know, as a daughter, so I serve my family as much as possible. I see myself as an Oromo person, so I'm very passionate about things that are Oromo. At the same time, my mother's Turkish. I see myself as Turkish as well. So I'm very particular about learning about Turkish culture, Turkish cooking, Turkish food, Turkish entertainment, Turkish songs. And at the same time, again, as a Muslim, I'm very passionate about social action, particularly when it revolves around Muslim people. So for me, it's all about identity. Anything that promotes a sense of who you are, I think is really important. And that was the main thing that I ended up volunteering myself for. So when I meet people and they say, oh, well, you know, are you Muslim? Are you Oromo? Are you Turkish? And I think we live in a globalized world, where people have so many different identities. You know, you go on the street and you're American, or you're with your friends, and you come home and you're this, you know, beautiful Oromo girl, and you go to the mosque and then you're a Muslim there. And what a lot of people struggled with, even myself, is trying to blend all of those together. And it's not an easy formula to make, but I've been lucky to be supported from all the environments. And what brought me into all of those different factors was that I felt like I was fulfilling a sense of who I was. So that's why I got involved in all of these different things.
Wow, summed up beautifully.
I guess one of the biggest difficulties I've faced as a young woman is people's expectations. People have a certain idea of what women should be like, or what women shouldn't be like, or what they should be involved in. And I think that's really tough, because there's so many images coming towards me and towards many young American, Australian women, where you need to look a certain way, you need to act a certain way to be successful, and we look at those images and try and become them. And I think the most successful women are those that look to the strengths within themselves. I mean, as women, there are so many strengths that we have, and yes, there are a lot of people who may be intimidated by those strengths, but I think rather than turning it into an argument, or into who's right and who's wrong and who should have more rights and who doesn't, I like to work in collaboration with people. And I think, I guess now I'm moving into what's helped me. One of the difficulties is, you know, I guess not being taken seriously sometimes, and the ways to overcome that is to work in collaboration with people who have the same values as you do. They'll appreciate the work that you do, and then the rest falls from after that.
Okay. So, in terms of, those are the difficulties you faced as a woman.
Yeah.
But how about in terms of racism based or discrimination based on the color of your skin or the hijab or the head covering that you wear? Have you faced any sort of discrimination or any challenges in those aspects?
Look, it really depends. Generally speaking, I have experienced racism from when I was a child. I mean, I look different to people. In the community that I grew up with, I was the only brown child. In the high school that I went to, I was the only person who wore the headscarf. Out of 200 students, it was just me. And there was one of two options. I could blend in, and there were many times where I contemplated, I wish I'd looked lighter, I wish I didn't have the scarf on, I wish I didn't dress a particular way, and so on. And I remember at one point I was thinking of taking my scarf off, and I thought to myself, this is really dangerous. People are attacking me because I'm wearing the headscarf, and my faith says that if your identity is at stake, then don't worry about it. So I was thinking of, taking it off with that in mind, and then I thought to myself, well, hang on a moment, hang on. If I take off my scarf, then I'm going to be teased because of my skin. If I change my skin, I'll get teased because of my hair. If I change my hair, I'll get teased because of my height. If I get teased because of my height, I'll be teased because of my faith. So people will constantly have something to pick at you over. And I think if you take something and you own it and say, this belongs to me, it's not about telling people whether they're right or wrong, but it's about taking something and making it your own. I think people really respect that. And I think, everyone's trying to stand out and trying to look different and trying to create trends in a world where the media is constantly changing. I think the most trendy thing you can do is be true to yourself and be as individuals who you are. And the difference between what makes it fashionable and not fashionable, I think, is how you interact with other people. I don't think it's particularly fashionable to assert who you are while you put other people down. Whereas if you assert yourself and say, this is who I am, I love who I am, I enjoy what I do, yes, I struggle with it at times, but this is who I am, I think people respect that a lot, particularly when you don't impose on them. I never impose my faith, I never impose my politics, I never impose my perspective of what I think the community is on other people, because I think, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier about collaboration, communities work best when we collaborate. So if we find what our boundaries are and what it is that we want to collaborate on, I think we're up for something really successful. And I think, for example, one of the projects I find that I've been working on is a good example of that. So I've taken what I wanted to define as myself, so taking something like language, and say to people, we don't need to necessarily pick and choose over what our political positions are or what your view of what governments, of what religion, of what books, of what interactions you have. I'd like to think that the books, for example, will let you make your own decision about who you want to be or how you want to portray your sense of Oromoness. Same thing with being a Muslim. As a Muslim woman, I'm very happy to share my views and perceptions, not to make people become Muslim, but for people to make an informed decision and say, oh, I know why she does that now. And not necessarily about them following me or what it is that I want to do. I think everyone needs to follow their own paths, and there's plenty of opportunities to do that. I think the more we allow people to discover their own paths, particularly if they're not harming other people, particularly if they're on a journey of self-discovery, I think that's what the meaning of this world is all about. That's really deep, though.
Yeah, well, you are a psychologist, so...
Yeah, so I do have a background in psychology, and I always do think about the ramifications and the meanings of things.
Yeah, so basically acknowledge who you are, and then you can work through it based on that.
Acknowledge who you are and try and find people who are similar to you. And a good way to do that is a lot of volunteer organisations. Speak up. People don't speak up. People speak out. People tell you, say this, say that. Don't worry about what you need to say to others. Just speak up and make yourself known. If you make yourself known, if you can think of your words as a light, if you speak up and you light up what you have to say, then other people will light up with what they have to say. And then you see where all these different lights are, and eventually you connect. Mm-hmm. And that's when you come up with collaborations and meaningful relationships with people. And in that sense, I think there's a lot of opportunity particularly with social media, for people to make those connections. But the meaning they give to those connections, I think, is something that's beyond social media and is a more face-to-face thing.
Absolutely. In terms of, you were born and raised in Australia.
Just like you. Like you, Aisha.
I personally consider myself second generation Australian. And that's a part of my identity as well as my faith and my cultural background.
Sure.
Being Oromo and Muslim. And other factors that contribute to my identity.
Yeah.
Do you think being Australian has a definition or has a term?
Oh.
What is your opinion in regards to that?
I think what it means to be Australian for me, I think as Australians, and again, I'm generalising here, beyond our accents, I think Australians are generally, people generalise them as quite laid-back people. And I think that comes back to beyond the Australianness and goes back to Indigenous Australia. Mm-hmm. Indigenous Australian people, from what I understand and my experience of them, they're very at one with the land. They're very good at collaborating with one another. They're very laid-back people, very laid-back, very friendly. They've had a very sad history, and a lot of tragic things have happened to them in the hands of the Australian government, which they're still suffering from today.
Yeah. Generational.
I think so. Having said that, the British people who came to Australia and made Australia their home, I think, in a sense, have taken from the Indigenous people. The sense of laid-backness, definitely. The sense of, we'll see how it goes.
Inherited the culture.
Exactly, I think so. And what they also brought to Australia was, I guess, a sense of critique. And Australians are very critical people. They're always keen to hear the other side of the story. They always ask, and what do you think? Australians always have an opinion on everything. So I think being Australian's really helpful for me, and I do see myself Australian in the sense that I do have opinions on things. I do like to think of myself as a critical thinker, and I'd like to think that I've also taken from the Indigenous Australian community in the sense that we're very at one with our land as much as possible. You can tell from our carbon tax and our commitment to things like recycling and looking after our country. Those things are ingrained, saving water and so on. I think they're quite Australian things in terms of trying to look after ourselves as a nation, as a country, and as a people. And we're very, very, very big sports fanatics. I'm not. Australians are. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think that this type of because in terms of being Australian, being American, being Canadian, these countries that European settlers have come to settle in, and the Indigenous people that were living there prior to them, people tend to, like you said, generalize or stereotype and think that being American or being Australian or being Canadian has a certain definition. Yeah. But now you've just, explained your version of being an Australian, and I completely agree with that. Do you think that can roll over to being an American or being a Canadian?
I think most colonizations that have occurred have been no longer than 500 years old. I mean, whereas Indigenous communities have been around for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. So to come into a country and to take away that culture with your own, 500 years is a long time, 100, 200 years is a long time, but in the scheme of things, it's actually a very short period of time. So we're in a very new era, in a very new way of living, and I think it saddens me to think that we'll be losing the Indigenous cultures of the world, which is happening at a very fast rate at the moment. I mean, they say statistics show that, within the next 100 years, half of the world's languages will disappear. That's in 100 years. So you can only imagine how rapidly these changes are happening. People's sense of identity, people's sense of who they are is constantly changing all the time. Media is constantly transforming people, telling us what we should and shouldn't look like. And I think in some senses we've adapted quite well. In terms of communication, we've become quite good. We know how to manage our social media, our telephones, our pages and our laptops so that it actually helps our lives. I feel like with globalization of ethnicity, we're a little bit slower. I think what we've tried to do is try and take one or the other without realizing the beauty of both and trying to make them work together in collaboration. So I think there is possibilities for it. The fact that you can wear, a dress that's made in Thailand, eat French food in an American country with a book that's made in China, can show that we can make the world work together. We've done it in economics. We've done it in communication, and I think we need to do that on a more personable level. And I think social media is a good start into that, but I certainly don't think it's the end. And I think we've got some time to go before we're all comfortable with all the different facets of our identity.
Wow, yes. Okay, so you basically can roll over into other colonized countries as well.
Well, I think more than rolling over, I think because you assume when you roll over, like something takes over the other. I'd like to think that somehow, I don't know, it comes together.
Like a blend.
Something like that.
We're towards the end of our program. In regards to who or what have been your major motivations and who's been your major support in becoming who you are today? Who are they, or what have they been?
I guess the people who've shaped me the most are my parents, namely my mum and my dad. And they are my biggest examples in terms of everything, in terms of raising a family, in terms of relationships with their children. I hope that when I have children, I can relate with them as well as my parents have related with me. I think they've created a family environment that allowed us to flourish. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. That's something that I wish I could have even for, in all of the work that I do. So I think my parents are the biggest inspirations and the biggest example that I have at a practical day-to-day level where I interact with them all the time. When I have issues, I can speak with them and they never make my problems seem too small or too big.
Fair enough. Family support is essential.
Absolutely. And I think that's in terms of my past. In terms of role models out in the public, I do have a number of role models that I look up to for different reasons. I don't think I have one particular role model, but there are multiple people around the world who've really achieved things incredibly well. Like, for example, I really look up to Steve Jobs in the sense that he was someone who had a visionary idea and was able to create a brand new way of looking at technology or a brand new way of looking at things, and he did it with precision, and he kept surprising people and he kept bringing out new things, not just new things but amazing things that we could actually use in our lives.
Still doing it.
And he's still doing it from his grave. He's left a legacy. So I think that quality of Steve Jobs is amazing, and I really look up to that. I look at people like Nelson Mandela and think there's someone for 27 years was in prison, and then he came out, he spoke the language of the people who oppressed him so that he could engage and interact with them, and he speaks it just as well as they do. And he really, for me, epitomizes the essence of perseverance, what it means to persevere. I look at Lady Diana. She was the people's princess. She's passed away a long time ago. But she was someone, beyond what was happening in her personal life, out in the public, she was with the people. And I think that's what contributed to her popularity, was that all of the work she was involved in related to the people, collaborated with the people, and that's why she left behind such a legacy. So that part of her leadership, I think, is phenomenal, and she was an inspiration to a lot of others. I look at Rabia Kadir, who was, one of China's, she was the fourth most richest woman in China at one point, and she was a young Muslim woman who was very passionate about standing up for the independence of her people, the Uyghur people, which in a way similarly reminds me to the Oromo people, but she was a very powerful woman, and she utilised all of her energy to put her people on the map, and I think she's done a fabulous job of that. She's taken it to the White House. So she released a documentary that I thought was very inspirational, and it was called The 10 Conditions of Love. And it was actually a love story of the man that she was going to look for. And she said, the man that I find needs to have these 10 conditions. And she actually finds the man. So that's a really interesting documentary. And I think she's a very powerful woman as well. So I guess there's lots of people with lots of inspiring stories. I guess as an overall, as a complete picture, I think a lot of men in history, particularly for me personally, I take the Prophet Muhammad as a role model for myself, particularly because he was one who inspired those who relate to us today, like Malcolm X, like Martin Luther King. These are the men who possess these traits that originated in people way before them, who spent thousands of years propagating their message in a way that still rings true to us today. And that's what I wish for myself and for everyone else, that the work we do today is still spoken about thousands of years later.
Now that's a legacy.
Yeah, we can do it.
Yes.
If we believe in ourselves, we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I know that a lot of young females have expressed to me that they find you quite inspirational and they find you as a role model. So you're already doing it. So congrats to that.
Thank you. And I hope that, you know, people who do look at me and say, wow, she's done it, you know, how do you do it and how do I go out there? I hope that when people watch this video that they feel like there was something they wanted to do and they feel like, okay, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to talk about it. And that's the first step. Talk about it. Start talking. Let people hear about the dreams that you have and the goals that you have for yourself, because you never know where those words might lead you or who might hear about those words. You may end up with a publication of your own, which I never anticipated when I was 12 years old going into my school with no one else that looked anything like me.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. What would you like to leave our viewers with? What are your last words?
My last words is to definitely speak up. If you've got something that you've always wanted to do, know that there are 15 other people who want to do it as well and who are probably just as scared or just as nervous or anxious about it as you are. So if you think it's possible to be done, then it's possible that somebody can do it. And if somebody can do it, then anyone can do it. And if anyone can do it, why can't that person be you? I think that's the message I'd like to leave everyone with.
Thank you for being on our show today.
No worries. Thanks for having me on the program.
That's okay. There you go, everybody. Total Tufa, a woman of many calibers. Anyone can do it. You just got to put your mind to it and be strong, and you can do it.
Exactly.
Thank you for watching the AOA show, everyone.
No worries.